This episode is brought to you by What's the Big Idea, an indispensable guide to becoming a kick-ass creative director by yours truly, Jaime Cabrera. Pick it up on Amazon and now available on Audible. If you've always wanted to know what it takes to be a commercial director, you need to check out commercialdirectingfilmschool.com. I'm signed up for the Filmmaker Bundle, which includes the Masterclass, the Online Shadow, and the Case Study Masterclass. It's got 100% 5-star reviews, and it also includes a 30-minute call with the master himself, my friend Jordan Brady, who's directed more than 1,300 commercials for top brands. And right now, exclusively for my listeners, use the code BIGIDEA, one word, to get a whopping $100 off either the Masterclass or the Shadow course. Again, the code BIGIDEA, one word, for $100 off. Go to commercialdirectingfilmschool.com and get started today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast Confessions of a Creative Director, the original podcast made by a creative director for creative directors, for aspiring creative directors, for creatives of all types looking to up their game by listening and learning from the very best in the business. This is your podcast, and I am your host, Jaime Cabrera. Welcome back. On today's show, I have creative director extraordinaire Brett Essman from ad agency Preston Spire in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Brett's here to talk about being proactive as a creative director and looking for the opportunity to create big ideas in every brief. And when you really boil that down, what he's really describing is this idea of not becoming complacent, but pushing yourself to go above and beyond. It's about the grit and perseverance you need to get to do the work that makes you feel fulfilled. And what I love about Brett is that it's not all talk. He's got real case studies to back it up. So without further ado, let's get into it with Brett Essman. Brett Essman, how are you, buddy?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's nice to have you on the show. Finally, we've been trading communications for a while and trying to get you on the show. So I'm super excited that we finally found the time to make it work. Welcome to Confessions of a Creative Director. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I know I'm filling in after some really big shoes, so you must have ran out of talented people to talk to.
No, not at all. Not at all. You are. I will grant you that those are big shoes. You're coming in after Greg Hahn for the 50th episode. And of course, just had Margaret Johnson from Goodby Silverstein and Partners on. But you know what? This show has always been about highlighting great creatives, great creative directors, people from all across the country working at shops big and small. And so when you reached out to me and we started talking and I saw the kind of work that you were doing, it's all one and the same to me. I feel like great work is great work, whether you're doing it for the biggest clients in the world or you're doing it for, a regional client, whatever it is, it's about the work and it's about the people. So welcome to the show. And I think you belong in the pantheon of Confessions of a Creative Director. Wow.
Well, thank you. I hope my head doesn't get any bigger than what it already is. I'm already having a hard time buying baseball caps. So
I wanted to, I want you to kind of give us a little tour of your career here, but going through your profile and doing my research, I was struck by what you have in your About section. And it says, I'm an idea-first creative that proactively brings solutions to clients before they ask for them. My personal motto is get shit done. Also, I love Oreos, not double stuff, the OGs. Yep. I love that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And again, that's what I love about creative people that are working at different size shops. I mean, it's really, at the end of the day, it's about being idea first and idea driven. So I love that. We're going to get into that. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit about where you've been and what you've done, and let the audience know what's been going on.
Awesome. Yeah. So I initially got into advertising because when I was doing my undergraduate at St. Cloud State, which is a small school north of Minneapolis, they said that you needed a portfolio, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to do that. I'll go into advertising. That seemed way cooler. So as I was going through the program, I joined the Ad Fed Club, and we came down to Minneapolis, and we toured Fallon. And this is like during their heyday, like right after they did BMW films. Like the space is great. They had a BMW in the lobby. It was beautiful. And so they're like, what do you want to do in advertising? I'm like, I just want to make ads. They're like, cool. Well, let me see your book. I'm like, oh, no. Like, I don't want to write books. Like, I want to make ads. I want to make advertising. They're like,
Yeah.
no, you idiot. Like, a book is a portfolio. You need a portfolio. I'm like, oh shit. Like, I should have went back into design. So when I graduated, I literally enrolled into Branco Advertising School of Design 2 weeks after I graduated. Did that whole thing, worked with a lot of great writers, got into CMYK, that magazine for students. And then when I graduated, I think it was '08 or '09, but it was in the heart of recession. So all my instructors were getting let go. They were
Wow.
they were becoming like, I'm losing my job as a creative director. I'm going to go, be at Crispin to be, an intern or something. And so I was working at Kinko's at the time. And so I was making, I don't know, $8 an hour, wearing like the Star Trek uniform and printing my book for free when people still printed their book. And so I got an email from Alec Boguski because I think before Christmas that year, I'm like, hey man, I want to work there. So they flew me out the day after I graduated. And I'm like,
Wow.
holy shit. Like, this is going to be awesome. I'm like defeating all odds. My first real-time interview. So I think I had like 10 too many cups of coffee. I was like all over the place. I got to talk to Andrew Keller and Rob Riley. And I ended up not getting the job, but I told my now wife that, once I get a job in advertising, we'll get married. And so it took about a month before they got back to me. And so I proposed to my wife. She said yes. And then I didn't get the job. I'm like, fuck. How am I going to pay for this ring now? I'm like, basically, I'm getting $9 an hour at Kinko's. And so it was tough. No one was hiring. And so I'm like, God, I'm never going to get into advertising. Like, I'm going to be like a regional manager at Kinko's, like, like printing stuff for like the Best Buys and everything. and I luckily got in at FCB Chicago. I was working on Motorola when they were still around, doing like below the line stuff, like posters that would end up at break rooms at T-Mobile, AT&T. I did that for about a year, and then I went over to Havas down the street, worked there for a little bit, and then my writing partner and I went out to Portland, Maine, where the VA agency was just named Small Agency of the Year. So I worked on Klondike, worked on, what else? A whole bunch of other stuff. We pitched Mini Cooper, did a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And then we moved back to Minneapolis, where I worked at Martin Williams for a couple years. And then I was at Periscope for about 7 years, working on Trolley, Minnesota Twins, Carbon Works, and, great clips, a whole bunch of new business. And then now I'm at Preston Spire, a small little agency in Minneapolis. They started out as Kirker, and then it was Preston Kelly, and now we're Preston Spire, where the whole motto is good wins. So do work so good that it's welcome into people's lives. So that's the whole thing. Like, every brief we get, we try to make stuff emotional or funny or anything just so people want to engage with the work, not, change the channel or do stuff like that. So
yeah,
that's where I'm at now.
That's great. I mean, and you've got quite a few names in there in terms of places that you've been. So you're no slouch, my friend. And that's really what I've noticed about the work that you have been promoting on LinkedIn is just how moving it is. One that sticks in my brain, and I'm sure we'll jump around, but one that sticks in my brain a lot is the one about the life vest, which was really, I mean, that wasn't funny at all, but
Right.
it was, but it appeared as if it was going to be, and then it just sucked you right in. If you wouldn't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about that campaign.
Sure. So I have two little boys. They are 6 and almost 9. And so I picked them up from school one day and, did the typical like, hey guys, how was your day? And they're like, it was great. We did the bad guy drill today. I'm like, oh, what's the bad guy drill? They're like, oh, we hide in the bathroom in case a bad guy comes to our school, and we're just really, really quiet. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, growing up, in small town Minnesota, we did like tornado drills and fire drills, which were terrifying. And so now my boys are part of this culture where, wherever you go, something could happen with gun violence, And so we were grocery shopping at Aldi, and where you could rent, how you rent like the grocery carts, put the quarter in. It just popped in my head. I'm like, God, what if we did this stunt where we would rent out bulletproof vests to people as they went grocery shopping? So that was the initial idea. And so I think a couple years ago, Leo Burnett did that beautiful campaign, The Lost Class with Change the Ref, which is an organization that was founded by Manuel and Patricia Oliver. They lost their son, Joaquin, during the Parkland school shooting. And so the day that happened, they both basically decided that the rest of their life, they're just going to become activists and get gun reform. And so they do sit-ins at the national capitol. They do the Lost Class. They did the children's book of Joaquin's first school shooting, and so they're very, very active and making a change, which is great. And so we presented the idea to them. They loved it, and it took about a year to finally make it happen. But they came to Minneapolis. We made a rack where we had bulletproof vest hanging, and then we just went all over town. So like outside of a grocery store, outside of a theater, on a running path, and we just had them holding the vest, asking people if they wanted to try them on. And of course, people are like, "Well, why are you handing this to me?" And we had a flyer saying like, "This is our new life." Like if we don't make some kind of change. Like if it's raining out, you grab an umbrella. It's snowing out, you grab your parka. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go to a parade. Okay, I need to get my bulletproof vest. And so it's a really, near and dear topic, just because my children are living this, and, we're all living this. And since we launched that project, I think there's probably been like 20 more shootings because it just keeps happening.
Right.
And so the whole point of the campaign was just to keep people talking about gun reform and gun violence, because it's to the point now that it happens so much that we're just like, oh,
yeah,
it's on page 5 now of the Times instead of front page.
And I don't know if you've ever caught yourself saying something like this, where it's like, oh, well, it was only 3, right? And you're not saying it literally like, it's no big deal, but I mean, it becomes weird. So I love that the video that you guys did, which was kind of like a commercial, sort of like a direct to consumer commercial, right? With all the bright starbursts and like, order now, are you going to the supermarket? Are you going here? And it just contextualized how ridiculous the whole thing really is, right? And it's kind of like, this is kind of where we're heading, where you'll probably, this will be our reality, where you're like, I'm going to the grocery store, let me get my bulletproof vest.
Well, I mean, the thing that's crazy about the whole situation, they're looking at the architecture of schools. Instead of having straight hallways, they're making them, diagonal so people can hide. It's like, that's not the solution.
That's bizarre. I hadn't heard that, but
yeah. So I mean, and so it's in the same vein of like, oh, like instead of changing gun laws, like why don't we just wear bulletproof vests? And it's crazy. And I always think advertisers have such a huge platform to do work, use creativity for the better good of society. Like, this thing popped up in the New York Times because right now the Olivers, they decked out a school bus, and it's called the Guac Magical Tour. And they started in Parkland, and they did the whole southern, they went up through LA, and now they're heading back east. But every town that had some sort of gun violence, they're like connecting with parents and really doing like this big movement. And so, it's crazy, like if I lost my children, I don't know if I could face this nightmare every single
Oh my
day.
God. Yeah, I don't.
And
Yeah.
Manny and Patricia are absolutely amazing human beings, like greatest humans on this earth.
So if I heard you correctly, that was an example of you sort of being proactive, right? Because if I heard you correctly, you sort of brought that idea to them, or were they already a client, or how did that work out?
No, I brought the idea to Chris Preston of Preston Spire. I was like, hey, I had this idea. I'm really passionate about it. Would this be something the agency would be interested in doing? And Jennifer and Chris both 100% backed it up, and we made it happen. It was great. So it's one of those things that to be proactive about, like, it doesn't have to be something gun violence, like
Sure.
talking to especially like junior mids or even senior level creatives. If you're not happy with what briefs you're getting, I know before COVID, like the whole side hustle thing was kind of like, you need to have a side hustle, or what are you doing with your life, kind of bullshit. But
Yeah.
I do think that if you're not getting what you want out of your career, like, I think putting in that extra effort of like, okay, what is something that I want to do? What is a project or a problem I see out in the world that I can use creativity to help them out with? And if you do it right, it turns out to be a great piece that you can put into your portfolio.
That's that's amazing. And what I love about that particular story, and probably others, right, is the fact that the leadership of your agency um, shares that idea of being proactive and thinking ahead, and that I would imagine is rare. I think, right, because that takes time out of whatever it is that they might be doing to drum up business, or whatever it is that the day-to-day running of an agency requires, right, for them to step outside of that and listen to your idea, recognize that it's a good one, and then help you bring it to life. I mean, I think that probably says a lot about the agency. So kudos to your leadership there.
Yeah, it's a creative's dream when you can work at a place and you can pitch ideas to the owners, essentially, and saying like, hey, I really want to do this. And they're like, we 100% agree. Let's make it happen. Obviously we have to get, the paying client stuff done first. But, I think when you have a great idea, you have the passion behind the idea, like, I think that just energizes everybody around you to be like, holy shit, like, he's either really crazy or he's really passionate about this. And
Right.
then it just kind of spreads, and they see the end result in it, and it inspires other people in the agency to be like, okay, cool, that was a really cool project that we did. Like, what else can we do? Like, how can I, as an individual, be proactive about something to, even if it's a current client, to bring something to them that they didn't even ask for. Because if you got briefed on say a direct mail assignment, and they're like, we just want a postcard to send out. And it's like, okay, here's that postcard, but here's this 1,000-foot big idea that's really going to show up in culture and make your name be known,
Yeah, and it sounds like that's a real life example. Well, what's that all about? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was a couple years ago. One client that we were working on, it was Forest Carbon Works, which, just by the sound of it, you're like, I don't really want to work on that. It sounds really complicated. It sounds really confusing. But once we dug in, the whole concept behind this organization, they would find landowners that would have thousands of acres of trees, have them make a lifetime commitment of not cutting the trees down so they can offset carbon being released by the manufacturers in that area. And so we were briefed on this assignment, and they're like, we're just going to send a postcard to these, landowners. And my partner and I were thinking, like, okay, well, we're trying to save the planet. We're trying to save trees. Why would we cut down a whole bunch of trees and send out a direct mail piece? Like, it just didn't make any sense. And so we pitched one idea called, God, it was called like the greenest direct mail piece or something like that. And we were going to get homing pigeons and have them fly to the landowners and like drop this little letter. And so when we told the producer, we're like, hey dude, like we need to find out like how homing pigeons work and all this stuff. And I worked with this producer a ton of times, and he's just like, I know you're not fucking kidding with me, Brett. Like I will look into it, whatever, you know. And so he found this guy down in, I think it was somewhere in Texas, but his whole life, like all he does is deal with homing pigeons.
Yeah.
And there's actually a book that has pictures of these pigeons and like how many flights they've been on and like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so they didn't buy that idea. They loved it, but they just couldn't execute it in enough time. But the idea that they did buy, it was called the chainsaw that saves trees. And basically, we had a rep from the company show up over on the East Coast in Maine, where like these landowners had all these trees, and they delivered this chainsaw. And so you probably think like, well, how does a chainsaw save a tree? Well, it's kind of like, you know, when you have a whole bunch of cattle, like you have like a sick cow. You don't let that sick cow live, like, because it's going to spread. And so when you have a sick tree, you got to take that tree down. So like sometimes you have to make those hard decisions. And so they showed up with these chainsaws. They like all these landowners signed up for this program. And I think it was shortlisted for like, is either Muse or one of those things like, Impact Climate Change Awards or something like that. But that whole assignment started with like, hey, we just want a direct mail piece. And we saw the opportunity of like, okay, we did make a direct mail piece, but it was from tree scraps that we printed on, like we would burn. That was like the follow-up direct mail piece. So we answered the brief technically, but we saw it as a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, and so you created this thing, which was, I don't want to categorize it as a stunt, but it was more of an experience, right? And probably a few people got it. You probably filmed it.
Yep.
And then you still did the brief.
Yeah, and they loved it. You know, we were on this call and the client was like, hey, I just searched up the chainsaw that saves lives or saves trees.org, you know, and the domain's not available. And we're just like, oh my God, like we just pitched this incredible idea and like one small little detail we forgot about. We're like, what? Are you serious? He's like, yeah, I just bought it. And so like as we're presenting the work, like he bought the domain name. So we're like, okay, well, we're going to be doing this campaign for sure.
That's really cool. That's awesome. So obviously we're talking about examples here, right? But just to knock people over the head, the real story here is about how at some point in your career you realized that, hey, I got to create the opportunities that I want to do, the type of work that I want to do. At what point did that happen? Where were you more or less, whether in age or, you know, even if you want to talk about where you were at what agency, when did that finally click to you where you're like, I can either sit here and complain that I'm not getting, you know, cracks at really cool briefs or cool projects, or I can just pitch shit that I want to do and see what happens. When did that happen?
Man, well, I think I've always kind of had kind of that entrepreneurial spirit to myself. So I remember when I was a junior and I was working at FCB and I was working on garbage and I was like, God, I fucking hate doing these break room posters for Motorola. Like, this is terrible. And so I emailed Luke Sullivan, who was at GSD&M at the time, and I was, you know, Fallon legend. And I was just like, hey, dude, how did you guys do it? Like, how did you make opportunities? And he's like, everything that comes across your desk is an opportunity, which I agree with. Like, you can make an opportunity out of like a ton of stuff, but like sometimes it doesn't work. Like, clients like, no, we don't want that. We want this banner ad. That's all we want.
Right.
So I've always kind of had it in the back of my head, but I would say in the last 3 to 4 years, I would say I started looking at things differently. Like, I always, you know, like when I got out of ad school, you know, I wanted to work at Crispin. It was the hot shop. It was the agency of the decade. And, you know, like there's the Wyden and Kennedy's, there the Drogas, the Mischiefs, like all great agencies. But I almost like attach like my self-worth to it of like, if I didn't get into these agencies, like I am a hack, like I am a terrible creative, like I should go back to Kinko's because I don't deserve to work in advertising. And so like one day it just kind of clicked to me of like, well, instead of just like holding this like unrealistic goal above your head, like why don't you just start making stuff happen for yourself? And so I tried it out and it worked. Like obviously not every project gives you the opportunity, but it's kind of like, those really cheesy like 80s and 90s rom-coms where someone's just like, I have the self-confidence now, I'm going to do it,
Cue the montage.
Yeah,
Cue the
cue the
montage.
montage. And so I just started, instead of complaining and being like, well, if I worked at X, Y, and Z, like this shit won't happen. Like it happens everywhere. Like no matter the name on the door, like you have to deal with client bullshit. You have to deal with ideas that are dying. But like when you start like thinking about how can I maximize this opportunity, or how can I take this little thing and be like, hey, here's what you asked for. You came to us for a reason. This is what you should be doing. And usually the client's like, holy shit, like I didn't even think about it like this. We're like, yeah, this is like how we can solve this stuff. And so it's kind of like that, the thing of just keep pushing yourself and just keep looking for those opportunities,
Yeah. And you sort of glossed over this, and maybe you already knew him on a personal level, but you just said, "Oh, I emailed Luke Sullivan," so it was one of the greatest copywriters of all time, right? And don't squeeze the Charmin, right? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Whipple, who squeezed?
Yeah.
Theirs. So you
literally just out of the blue sent him a note?
Yeah, so he came to Branko to look at books when he released, I think it was like the second or third edition of his book.
Yeah.
And so I met him kind of briefly, but yeah, I just emailed him out of the blue and just asked him for advice. I mean, I did the same thing with Alec Bogusky. When I was looking for a job, I was just like, hey dude, I love your work, love your agency. Here's my portfolio. Like, what do you think? And he responded, and, I ended up getting a job interview out of it. But I think, especially as a junior or a mid, it's like, you see all these like brilliant campaigns that your heroes have made, but, end of the day, they're humans, and most of them are like, the most talented people I've admired and I met in real life that have been super cool and super helpful, because I think it goes back to like when they started, someone took them under their wing and like helped them out. So I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to email, Greg Hahn, or I don't want to email, because it's like, well, what am I going to say? It's just like, hey, look at my portfolio, or like ask for advice. Like if he doesn't write back, or if she doesn't write back, like who cares? You still took a shot,
Yeah. And I love that. And I love, I mean, again, that also speaks to your approach, right? And the approach that people should take is just take a shot, right? Yeah, it can feel it can feel a little off-putting or a little bit embarrassing, but I've been amazed from my own side at how generous and how kind people have been. I mean, writing to Greg Hahn and just saying, "Hey, would you be interested?" And him responding so kindly and saying, "Oh yeah, I've heard it. I've heard of it, or some of my friends have been on it and like wanting to do it." Or Chris Doe, right, very early on when I wrote to him just on a lark, and he was like, "Sure." I mean, people are so generous, and I think it's probably a human, maybe more so in creative people, to want to help, because you probably remember how tough it can be, or the feelings that you have, right? Maybe as an imposter, I'm a hack or whatever. So I've always been really taken with people's generosity. And again, for the people listening at home, right, especially if you're an up and coming creative, or you're kind of in the middle, like Brett was talking about being, right, just take chances. What do you have to lose? You have literally nothing to lose. Sure, right. Maybe you'll get your feelings hurt a little bit if somebody doesn't write back to you, but I mean, you've got nothing to lose. So what else you got for us? What other kind of tips or ideas on how to be proactive and take control of your career?
Well, I think what you just said about taking that shot, that goes back to clients too. Like when you see like all the brilliant work, being done, like it's clients that are taking a shot too. So like when you bring an idea to a client that they're not necessarily asking for, but if you can be like, hey, we answered the brief with these two, but like this is answering the brief in a completely different way. like that is another way, that brands can be brave, clients can be brave because they're taking a shot. They're not just going down the middle. Because I mean, you've been doing this long enough. Like brands that just go right down the middle are the ones that are forgotten. And it's kind of like an advertising career. Like if you don't take those shots, like you're just gonna be bitching and moaning that you didn't take those shots. Like if you fail, you fail, but you learn something from it. And so I think another thing. I think I told you about this, but we just did this PSA for Minnesota Gambling Alliance, and
yeah, I just saw that one. Yeah,
and it's it's very much like, I don't want to say like anti PSA, but it's really dark. And when we sold in this idea, the brief was super simple. It was, people think gambling addiction is not like drug addiction or alcohol addiction. Like they think it's just like something wrong morally with the person. Like they can just stop going to the casino. So we pitched a lot of great ideas to our client. And the one that she bought was, we were comparing gambling to smoking, drinking, and doing cocaine. And so this is a great example of taking a big shot. I mimed all these actions out to her. So, I pretended that I was drinking from a deck of cards. I pretended I was smoking it. And then I went down, did like this fake line of cocaine, and I popped up. And I've only met this client once before this. And like I made eye contact, like we did it over Zoom. And I was like, holy shit, like I'm either going to get fired or this thing is going to be really great. And the client just like sat back like, wow, like I felt that. And that was, like after I'm like, okay, we're totally going to do that. But before I presented that, I don't know what clicked into my head. Like I would have, typically presenting work, I'm like, and right now would be miming, drinking from a box of cards. But I went and like 100%, 100%. And I was just like, I got off the call and it's like, and my wife Alana's like, how was the call? I'm like, I just did a fake line of cocaine in front of a client that I barely know. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, she loved the spot though. It was really amazing. And so we just had a meeting at work today where we went over the work, and I introduced the work. I'm like, this is the first and last time that I'm ever going to do a fake line of cocaine in front of a client, because it was just that moment. I'm like, holy shit, like what did I just do? Like, like I didn't even say anything. It was just like this miming everything.
Yeah.
And so, I've heard, stories of a lot of great campaigns that people have pitched, and clients, as soon as they saw it, they're like, we need to do that. Like, that's brilliant. And, usually when I present work, it's very, I don't know, it's not over the top. I'm not, doing fake lines of cocaine. And so I just think like when you believe in an idea, if it's a proactive idea or if it's just a regular idea, like if you're not presenting it with confidence, if you're not presenting it that you wholeheartedly believe in it, like the client's just going to be like, oh, so I think that's another little tip. Like when you present work, like believe in the work, because if you have that one idea in there that you don't like, but it's just kind of that safety net, like the client knows that it's a safety net. The way you presented it, that it's a safety net, and they're going to buy the safety net. And so just don't even put the safety net in there.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, and I name drop him all the time, but Ben Levy talks about that, right? Because at a certain point, as you're coming up as a creative director, it gets drilled into your brain that you shouldn't fall in love with your own ideas, right? Which in some ways, in the big picture way, it's sort of true, right? Like you shouldn't like become so enamored with it that you can't hear anybody's critique of it. Right. But on the flip side, you do have to have that passion for it. And because in his mind, when he was coming up, he was saying, well, I just thought that as a creative director, I just present it and it's going to be like, whatever they want, whatever the best idea is. But, you do have to sort of present it with some passion.
Yeah. And I think, for the most part, I think when a client sees an idea, they're like, yes, that's what we need to do. But if they're not that savvy and you present 3 great ideas, just like very monotone, not excited, they're just kind of like, well, I don't know which one to pick because the agency's not excited about any of these. Like, am I excited about any of these? Like, are these good or are they shitty? So I think, you got to be passionate. And, don't get too attached to an idea. Like, I think that's probably one of the hardest things to learn as a junior. Like, you're so eager to get something made and jacked because your whole book is just full of spec stuff,
Yeah.
and then you get hit over the head. You're like, holy shit, like, this is definitely not as fun as ad school because there's like money involved, there's clients involved, there's logistics and all that stuff. And so, you do see a lot of ideas, like there's always, now that we use Google Slides for all presentation, there's always like the graveyard that has, like 30, 40 slides of like stuff that you love. But, after you make something, you look back, you're like, God, I'm really glad they didn't buy that idea. Like, really, in retrospect, it didn't really make any sense,
Yeah. So some it's like passionate disattachment. Like, be passionate about it, but you also have to kind of detach yourself from it at some point.
You have to know when to abort the seat from the idea when it's not working. But that's the thing. I think some of my favorite people I went to ad school with, and same people that I work with, just finding the energy to like be proactive about stuff and looking for those opportunities. Like, if it's with the current client or if it's for some nonprofit that you're super passionate about. I think that's key, especially, as a junior and mid, that's not, if they're not getting the briefs yet because they're too junior, or if their agency doesn't do a lot of broadcast or big projects, I think start figuring out like where you want to go with your career. Like, what kind of work do you like making, and make it on a smaller scale, because that's kind of what you have to do because there's not money, and now.
Yeah. And yeah.
And now that we have like iPhones and everything, like, I don't want to say it's easy to make your own stuff, but like when I was in ad school, we had flip phones, and you can play Snake on it, which was cool at the time. But, now, you can go out and shoot your own commercial.
Absolutely.
You have to, I mean, it's probably better that you do it that way anyways, because you can't rely on like all these different cuts and all these different like post effects. Like, it's going to be like 2 or 3 shots because you're going to have to figure out how to cut that thing together in iMovie, So you have the tools. You just have to, I think, be disciplined and not wait for the opportunity to come to you. You just kind of have to make them yourself.
So let me ask you this, because you're still progressing in your career, right? Somebody listening who's been at this a much longer time, right? Have you just been that lucky and that talented enough that you presented lots of these kind of outlier ideas that were selected, or was it like a lot of no's to get to the yes? And if that's the case, how do you keep that motivation, right? Because for somebody that's been in the business a long time and knows the realities of what we do, sometimes it can be a little bit disheartening, right? Because you come in with that energy, right? Like, I'm going to pitch this thing, and then after a while, you start realizing, well, that maybe that's never going to work with this client. You know what I mean? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it all matters on the project. I've been lucky enough to work with creative directors or leaders that got behind ideas and helped sell them in, especially with the chainsaw thing.
Yeah.
Because I was probably senior art director around that time. So we, definitely a lot of help with that. But I mean, the life vest, there was, God, I don't even know how many no's we got before that happened. I think we pitched it to so many people. I remember jumping on, what is that website where like actors have like all their IMBD?
Yeah, IMDb.
Yeah, I was on that, like trying to find agents for celebrities that were like anti-gun to like try to get funding.
Wow.
And I would get replies of like, yeah, we'll post it on social. And then I'm like, no, like, I'm looking for funding. I'm like, great, you can post it on social. And then I never heard back. So we went down like every avenue, but going back to my 2 little kids, I'm like, I knew that I had to keep being persistent to get this idea through. And it was challenging. It was, it was super hard. But then if you think about the grand scale of things of like gun violence and like how much impact this idea could potentially have, it kind of motivates you to keep doing it. And and I run on coffee, so I don't think I ever get tired, you know.
So it's a good coffee, tenacity, positivity, and always being proactive. That's the Brett Essman secret recipe for success. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and Oreos, not the double stuff.
That's right. That's right. So you can dunk them in there.
But I think even even when you get feedback from clients on stuff, like if they don't get it right away, or if they're like, we like this idea, but we also like number 3, like how can we
combine them? Yeah.
Yeah. The good old Frankensteining.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's really easy to get, like really pissed off and complain about it. But, complaining just takes away from time of how you can solve the problem, So I think if you look at it as another opportunity to go back to the table with better thinking, a better solution than what you did the first round, like I think that's a better approach than being negative about things, because there's so much negativity in the world anyway. So at the end of the day, like when we make ads, like if they don't pick ad number 1 that we liked, the world's going to go on. There's not a huge amount of pressure.
Yeah.
But I think like if you can look at like almost like every turn of something as like a opportunity to make something better than what you did the round before, I think is a good mindset to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and something that I try to remind myself about, and my team, is like the coming up with the ideas is the work.
Right.
Right. And sometimes, not seeing them come to life hurts, right? Or it's discouraging. But if you try to focus on like, man, we get to like dream up shit and write it down on paper and visualize it and pitch it. That is the work, right? So if you can focus on getting your kicks out of that,
right,
and less on like it actually coming to life, that would probably be better. And I'm not saying that I'm talking to myself here, because I'm of that, I have been of that camp where it's kind of like, well, it's not getting made, so who cares? Well, you still had the idea and you still put it out on paper, right, and people talked about it and they liked it. Didn't get made, but if you can focus on that, you probably have more satisfaction.
Yeah, it's. And that's 100% true. Like if you only focus on the stuff that lives, like, we make something and then you look at it on YouTube and like someone hates it and you're like, fuck you. Why do you hate my idea? Like I worked really hard on this, but it's true. Like you got to take the victories when you can get the victories. And just, I think to have longevity in this business, you just got to stay positive, be a good human being, and just have fun and look for opportunities.
Well, I think you just described yourself to a T there. Positive, good human being, creative, all those things. So I'm sure now, and we probably opened the floodgates. Now you're going to start being the person receiving, all the inbound from people, from younger creatives, coming into the business or that need to kind of hear some words of encouragement or some advice. I'm sure now, if they haven't already, your LinkedIn inbox is going to get filled up. So thanks for sharing that with us. I think it's a timely message and probably one that we need to hear from time to time, right? Is because we tend to sometimes get in a rut and it's like, okay, gotta re-up the energy and gotta remember,
yep,
to be proactive.
Yeah, and to your point, like to all the listeners out there, like I'm happy to give any advice. I failed a million times. I'm gonna fail a million more. I'm happy to share my failures with you, or look at your book, or send you a pack of Oreos, like whatever you need. I'll help you through your rut.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We will be in touch. I'm glad that we connected, and I always enjoy, trading messages back and forth with you, and I hope we can continue that. And thanks again for being on the show, and continued success, man, for real. The stuff that you're doing there is just, it's amazing. Some of it's heartwarming. We didn't get to talk about the candles, but I'll post a link to that. Some of it's really, punch you in the gut, just like the life jacket and the gambling. You're doing great work there, so keep it up, and I look forward to seeing more of your work.
Very kind, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, take care, buddy.
All right,
see
bye.
you. All right. And that's going to do it, folks, for another episode of Confessions of a Creative Director. Thanks to my very special guest, Brett Essman. Everybody, please check Brett Essman's work out. It is really compelling. He's doing some amazing work there in Minneapolis. The work that we talked about, check that out, The Vest. Also the campaign for gambling. Super compelling work that just grabs you, pulls you in. Super dimensional from the experiential to the content. Really, really impressed with what Brett is doing. So he's someone to definitely keep an eye on. All right. If you're looking to up your game and become a creative director and you're like, what the hell does a creative director do? You need to pick up my book, What's the Big Idea? An Indispensable Guide for Becoming not only a creative director, but a kick-ass creative director. This book is really just the boiling down of my experience, my 20-plus years of experience in this business. It's got everything from how to overcome imposter syndrome to how to lead creative teams to how to lead an ideation. Really, everything that you need to know to at least be prepared to talk about the role is in this book. So pick it up. It's available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. It's also available as an audiobook. And if you want to get some one-on-one coaching, reach out to me. Hit me up on LinkedIn or check out my website, jaimecabreracreative.com, for special deals on one-on-one coaching. All right. Until next time, peace, love, and creativity. See ya.
But could you make the logo bigger? Bigger, bigger, make it bigger. Make the logo